Hi and welcome to this video. My name is the Chess Guy and we're going to have a look at the Sicilian Dragon. It's probably an opening that you have faced or that you love to play with black yourself. And then you might also know there's so much theory about this opening, which could be a lot of work to study. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some very fundamental ideas which are not very much related to knowing a lots of theoretical lines, but more understanding the pawn structure behind your opening. Because I think if you really understand the pawn structure, it is a lot easier for you to grasp your opening knowledge and to make sense of the moves you are playing, and also punish your opponent if they're making bad moves. So without further ado, let's have a look at the Sicilian Dragon's pawn structure, and then we're going to have a look at some crazy awesome games as well to show you how you can utilize these ideas. So here we have the pawn structure of the Sicilian Dragon. You can see that white is missing its D pawn and black is missing the C pawn. And the very obvious move in G6 means we are looking at the Sicilian Dragon's pawn structure. As for white, what you typically see is that white wants to open up the position on the king side, because we are going to assume that black castled on the king side and white will have castled on the queen side. So we're having an opposite castling game. So how do you open up your position? Well, it's pretty simple, right? You're going to push your pawns. So this is a major idea in the Sicilian Dragon, to push your H pawn, not to give away a pawn, but basically sacrifice it. Either you allow it to be captured on h5 or you take on g6, but your idea behind this pawn push is to activate your rook on h1, bearing down on the h-file towards the black king. This in conjunction with a queen and bishop usually tending to go to h6 to lead to a devastating attack. So remember to open up the position on the king side, mostly with the h-pawn. If the position requires you to push either g4 or sometimes f4, f5, you can strongly consider this, since it's very important that you want to open up files towards the black king. The other major idea in this typical pawn structure is the square d5. This could be used as an outpost, preferably by using your knight. Posting your knight on d5 is very strong because it applies lots of pressure towards the black king. Because remember, it's going to be on g8, and these two squares are in range towards checking this king. So having a knight on d5 applies quite some pressure towards the black king. Let's flip the board. Since we're not playing this opening for either color, I'm trying to show you guys the ideas, which means that black will have plenty of ideas themselves as well. What should come to mind is the open C file, which black tends to utilize by placing a rook on C8. And this pawn structure also, these three pawns, means they're on light squares. That means that the bishop on G7, besides being a very important attacker across the board towards the black king on white king on C1, it is also a very important defending piece for its own king. So always remember that this bishop on G7 is very important for tactical ideas and also for defending ideas of protecting the black king. And if the amount of pressure you can apply with your pieces on c8 and the bishop here is insufficient, don't forget that black has pawns here on the queen side, which tend to be used as ways to create weaknesses towards the black king. So either by pushing these pawns or giving them away, or chasing away pieces that are defending. For example, if there's a knight on c3, you could use this pawn to try and remove the defender of the white king. All right, these are some very typical and standard ideas in the opening, which are defined by the pawn structure. I'm going to have a look at two games, both with white and one with black, in which these ideas are successfully deployed by each player. So first of all, we're going to have the opening, which is, as expected, the accelerated dragon. And here we're going to see that white is going to develop his pieces first, which is very important in pretty much any opening. So we're not going to worry about too much of these moves here. So right around here, you can claim that white finished developing. I mean, still he has to maybe castle his king, but all of his pieces are actively developed. So after black has played his last developing move, white is now going to deploy the ideas we mentioned. So the first move is bishop h6. We now know that this bishop on g7 is both a very strong attacking piece towards the potentially white king on the queen side, but it's also a very important defender of the dark squares around the black king, which is why very typically you will see that white will play this idea with bishop h6. And after h4, white's just going to simply push the pawns towards the king side and trying to open up the h file for its rook. Black goes knight c4, attacks the queen, so white will capture and the rook recaptures. And now white takes the very important bishop, and after that, h4. And already you can see threats where white will take on g6, followed with queen to h6, and it could potentially already be checkmate very soon if black's not careful. So black plays e5. It's sort of an inaccuracy, but it was already tough to find good advice. But white's going to retreat the knight for now. And black is going to take the pawn. After g4, now the knight goes back. So you could argue that black's up a pawn, but white is more than happy to have removed his own pawn, because now queen comes in with a check, king g8, and the other pawn is used to attack this defending knight. The knight defends h7. So there's only one way basically to play here. If you don't want to lose the knight, is to go knight h4. But white is just going to sacrifice his rook for a devastating attack, because after knight to d5, another idea mentioned, you can see that knight f6 is quite a big problem for black. So black tries f4, stopping the idea of knight f6, because rook could sacrifice itself, I guess. But doesn't really matter, because white will just play g6, trying to rip open everything close to the black king. So g6, obviously threatening mate on h7. Black captures, and after queen captures, king g8, h8. White castled long, and this is actually a position where black resigned, because there's no defense against the checkmate. Most obvious, I think, is either a check on one of these two squares, and the rook will join the cause, and the king will be checkmated. So, for example, black goes queen to e8, still check here, king g8, rook g1 check, king f7, queen f6 checkmate. So just to quickly summarize, white used the h-pawn to open up files towards the black king, and tried to eliminate the defending knight from f6 using the pawn from g5, and then sacrifice the rook for the knight. And the second this knight jumped into d5, the black position was completely lost. So quite impressive game, but luckily for us, black also has plenty of ways to also win in beautiful style, which we're going to have a look at now at how black can play the Sicilian dragon. Alright, so in this game, the first couple of moves are known by now, which is the dragon once again. And you'll notice that white is sort of going to use the same ideas as in the other game, but black is going to use a different approach. I'm going to go queen a4, a5. And here you see that white is already ready to start storming down towards the black king. Black goes rook f to c8, h5, does capture the pawn. White now castles long. Knight goes to e5, knight back to e2, bishop b6. White plays king b1 here, stepping out of the dangerous c file. And after knight c4, takes, in g4. And it's at this moment that black is going to find a very good move. Simply because playing it passively is not really how you want to approach the dragon. And there's a ways for black here to almost win the game in one shot, which is a nice way, a nice tactical way to also win with black. So obviously the knight on h5 is attacked by the pawn, but black decides not to go backwards to f6. He does decide to move the knight. And notice how this knight is defending this knight on c3, and we already can see that this knight is a pretty important defender. For example, this bishop and queen are both looking at a2, and the knight is defending that square. And also, the knight on c3 at least blocks this bishop from reaching all the way to b2. So eliminating this knight on c3 would be very beneficial for black's attack. So he's going to undermine this knight by playing the very nice move, knight g3, sacrificing its own knight. After knight takes g3, black sacrifices his rook for the very important defending piece on c3. In this position, white decided to play the pawn to b3. If he would take the rook, bishop takes is an option, or mate in 2 is probably a little bit better. So queen a2, king c1, queen a1, checkmate. So that means you can't even recapture the rook. So b3 is forced. Black swings over the other rook, threatens rook to take on c2. White goes rook c1. And here comes the finishing blow. Bishop takes b3. He captures with the c-pawn. But after rook takes b3, he resigns. Because if you take, there's the mate. And there's really nothing else to do here besides taking the rook. So yeah, beautiful game by black as well. Just showing you how you could also use this important c-file along with this bishop to create a very devastating attack towards the white king. Alright, so if you made it this far, please consider subscribing and letting me know what you thought of the video. In the link of the description, you can find my Twitch, so drop me a follow to notice when I go live, and yeah, more than happy to answer any of your questions you have there as well. So for now, I'd like to thank you all so much for sticking around, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!